Good morning. My name is Odin Rathnam, and welcome back to Defining Virtuosity, a series of violin tutorials on all of the various components of the art of playing the violin. This morning, I want to share with you a special topic, and I've created the title, The Gypsy Next Door, Creating Conditions for a True Impulse Vibrato. Now, on the internet, there are plenty of tutorials on exercises for developing vibratos. Some of them quite good, some of them may be questionable. And again, I would advise you all to use comfort and result to measure the success of any tutorials that you use online. I'd like to direct you towards some of the very good ones for fundamental exercises for developing vibrato. I'm very fond of the exercises outlined in masterclass.com, which is Kurt Sussmanshause's site. It's very clear and good for beginners. I'm also enjoying watching some of Nate Cole's videos on vibrato that have exercises extracted from Simon Fisher's book Warming Up, and can recommend those. But I wanted to bring up some points that maybe I haven't seen as much in the other discussions, and that I think are really key and can unlock all of the problems with vibrato in a very organized fashion, because no matter how many exercises you practice, unless the correct conditions for a vibrato exist, it's very hard to do the right way. And I want to start by telling a little story about my childhood. I grew up on the Upper West Side, and I moved only once between birth and 18. The first 4 years of my life, I lived at 33 Riverside Drive, which was the home of Ira Gershwin and some other artists. And right across the hallway from our kitchen door was the entrance to the home of a really great violinist, truly remarkable violinist, one of Leopold Auer's last students that he taught in America, a man named Benno Rabinoff. And from the age, from when I was born until about 4.5 years old, almost 5, we lived there. And whenever I'd come out of the elevator, there would be this incredible sound coming out of the apartment to the left. Our apartment was to the right. We were right across the hallway from one another. And I would hear Benno Rabinoff rehearsing with his wife, Sylvia, who taught at Juilliard. And it was a sound similar to Tasha Seidel and young Elman and Heifetz, a type of sound that we don't hear so often anymore. And as I was growing up and studying the violin, I became attracted to the writings of Henry Roth, and he described the vibrato of a bunch of Leopold Auer's students as an impulse vibrato. And in the book Great Violinists of the 20th Century, over and over again, whenever he came to one of my favorite fiddlers, he described either an impulse vibrato or a combination impulse and wrist and arm vibrato, but it was never just an arm vibrato or a wrist vibrato. Those he wasn't as crazy about, and neither was I. My ear gravitated towards these ones that he described as an impulse style vibrato. And I remember trying to get that sound so desperately as a teenager, and doing all of the wrong things and tightening my arms. And I want to share with you a few things that can help to make it more natural. When approaching any vibrato exercise that you're doing, I'd like you to really think that the notion of fingertip, wrist, and arm vibrato are really all one and the same in terms of the angles that they fall on and how we execute them. But that the primary impulse is in the tip of the finger, always, and that the next slowest would then be the wrist, and the slowest of all would be the arm. And if we can learn to transition as smoothly between those as we do in the bow arm between a détaché, a spiccato, and a sautier, if we think of it that way, that they can transition cleanly one into the other, we can develop not only the electric sound that we want for certain moments in music making, but the more warm sounds or the darker sounds, whatever we want in the vibrato. But I'd like to talk to you about a few rules that I think are important in terms of the sort of Rathnam system for playing the violin. One of the things to monitor is the release of the finger pressure after each attack. The notion that we observe this sort of a rule of striking down, releasing, and if we did that lower to the string, when the string is attacked, the fingertip pressure after the moment of the attack is immediately less than it was at the moment of the attack of the note with the drop, or the. The second is the ability of all of the fingers to lengthen, and what I mean by that is the ability for them to lengthen this way. That's that if they don't get locked into the neck after impact, because that will lock the vibrato. The third rule that I like to monitor is that the elbow is hanging from the shoulder. Now, I had a question from a student at the Sydney Conservatory that I gave a coaching to yesterday morning, Oliver, about this notion of hanging from the shoulder and gravity. I do not mean pulling the neck towards the floor, because that will cause us to squeeze up against in order to try to, and can lead to a lot of tension. But rather the feeling that the fiddle can sort of rest in the fingertip and the thumb, and the elbow can suspend from the shoulder, that it can be free, left to right, and relaxed. The fourth thing that I think we should always consider is the angle of the fingers to the string. And there I would refer you back to the wonderful master classes taught by Rodney Friend on placing the fingers on the fifth, because it brings the fingers to the string at an angle which is conducive to a free and centered vibrato. 4A. This one of the things not discussed in Rodney's video that I think is very important is the center of gravity. Just like we're feeling the elbow hanging from the shoulder, we want to know where the center of gravity in the finger is when it strikes down. Here I don't fully agree with the school of thought that we have the most pressure on the tip of the finger in the squared position and then release the pressure back. I think that for an impulse style vibrato, on the moment of impact, the center of gravity should be just behind the first knuckle of the finger, so that it has a tendency to give on the impact. My justification for this is the slow motion footage of Jascha Heifetz's hand playing Scherzo Tarantelle. Watch very carefully how the fingers impact the string, and you'll see that's the case. They always give at the first point, the first joint of the finger on the impact. The fifth point is very important. I mentioned earlier the lengthening of the fingers when we vibrate. If you think of the fingers as more curled, the bass knuckles will be closer to the neck of the instrument, and as they lengthen, the bass knuckles release away from the neck of the instrument. That's particularly important for the index finger. The inside of the index finger, if it squeezes the neck, will lock the vibrato, regardless of which finger is vibrating. So not only when we vibrate the one, but any other finger, pay attention to the inside of your first finger, always. That will make the vibrato much, much freer. Let me go on. Because I want this to be an artistic discussion of vibrato rather than simply a mechanical one, because there exists so many good tutorials on the mechanics of it, and because I want to address again the issues not discussed as much in other videos online, I also want to bring up a couple of missing links that really weren't discussed nearly enough, in my opinion, in any of the other tutorials on vibrato as it relates to sound production. And that is that there is a correlation between vibrato patterns and bow patterns that's incredibly important for creating various colors. If we think of energy levels in terms of bow speed, pressure, and sounding point, these energy levels can be related to the speed and the amplitude, the frequency and amplitude of vibrato patterns. And they can be related three ways. They can be related parallel. They can be related, that's where they change at the same rate. They can be related obliquely, where one changes and the other does not. And they can be correlated opposite, where we're giving more energy in one hand and less in the other. And with those different combinations come a million different colors. It allows you to paint with a very broad palette of colors and nuance, meaning that you could, for example, use more bow speed on an attack and not give energy to the left hand so it doesn't sound hysterical, because if you have a lot of bow speed and a lot of catch and impact in the right hand and you go crazy in the vibrato, it'll sound hysterical. That's vibrating like a wild animal, as Shmuel Ashkenazi would say not to do. There are a few more points. So that one missing link is really important, bow correlation to how we're vibrating. The other, I watched a video with a very famous artist demonstrating how to practice a scale with different vibrato patterns. And I loved the video in many ways, except there was a direct correlation between the artist's intention and tension. And we can't have that. Absolutely cannot have that. We do not need to be more tense to create more energy or more intensity. Actually, the opposite. Freedom allows us to create more intensity. So that's another factor. Then one that I always have to remind myself of, and I think it's important for every artist to remember this. There's a difference between our musical intention and the sound effects we're producing and the intensity of it, and our ego. I think it's very dangerous if something external is going on that becomes a mask for what should be happening with the fiddle. We're in the business, as I said before, of emotional manipulation. And that means that we have to remain in control of our own emotions. So when practicing the exercises that I'm going to show you and the correlations that I'm going to demonstrate in a piece that I used to hear Benno playing across the hallway and that just had my mouth drop, and I'd be standing at the door. I had adenoids. I couldn't breathe so well through my nose until I had my adenoids taken care of. And so I'd stand at the door with my mouth gaping open, like listening to this incredible sound across the hallway. And that made me want a violin. The other things that come to mind when I'm playing and working on expression and vibrato, with the correlation in the bow and with pieces rather than just as exercises is the notion of remaining natural. That you don't want to force or fight with the instrument. You want to maintain a notion of ease. So that this brings us back to the issues that I discussed earlier in my warm-up exercises for the day, and they include that none of the 7 actions I've discussed with all of you of the left hand, lifting, dropping, crossing strings, shifting, vibrating, extending or contracting, should lead to increased tension in the shoulder, the inside of the index finger, the thumb, or the fingertips themselves. So we're not locking anywhere. So instead of thinking about the notion of vibrating sometimes, even if I'm going to vibrate a passage, I'm not afraid to practice it. This is for Daniel Vega Albela, my friend at New Mexico State University, who asked whether I practice with vibrato on every note all the time. And I said yes and no. I then said that with the caveat that if I practice non-vibrato, I practice with the notion that the conditions exist for the vibrato to take place. I left out one point in the left arm for vibrato patterns. We have to be able to, at will, release the bicep muscle. I believe that the use of the arm vibrato is more of a passive thing. It's not an active thing. We can release it as a sort of shock absorbers for the other things that are going on, rather than generating the arm vibrato there, at least not for fast patterns. But if we think for a moment that the smallest vibrato patterns, we focus our attention on just the very fingertip, and it almost feels as though the upper fingers are lifting. They're turned, and it almost feels the same as them lifting slightly. Very small range of motion, but you want all of that releasing energy to go into the collapsing of the joint, and that can happen in percentages. It can be 100% collapse, it can be a 75%, 50, 25, 10. It can be very narrow if you want it to be, and you can produce a lean sound that way. The next fastest vibrato would be the wrist vibrato, which is still faster than the arm vibrato. Again, if you observe Rodney Friend's rules, keep that on the same line as the fifth and in line with the elbow, so that you're adjusting, everything feels the same across the 4 strings, essentially. And I think in 3 planes, the A and E plane, the D and A plane, and the G and D plane. And then in extreme cases, when I have to for certain things, I'll go to the only G plane and the only E plane. But for the most part, I like to think in these planes in between, just like I like, for the most part, to shorten the distances between the 4 strings by thinking in terms of 3 main planes, and then feeling a slight difference to the 4th, the outer ones. Just because a lot of times we can make our motions more efficient this way. So what are some of the exercises that we can do to make sure that we're able to do all of these things while executing the 7 actions of the left hand? Well, we have to set up the hand for those. In the mornings, sometimes I go through a variety of shapes. I told you in my warm-ups of all half steps. Then I do a frame for F minor, melodic minor, so an A flat and a B flat and a G and an F. And then F major, yeah. And then E minor, E major, B major, C sharp melodic minor, so E, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B sharp. Okay, and then I practice, I told you the shapes of the top octave of a 3-octave arpeggio. The spanning of a minor sixth, we'll do it in A minor, C natural, E, A natural. Then the F major in second inversion, the augmented, then F sharp minor, then D major, D minor, then diminish. In these cases, you can see they involve extensions and contractions of the hand to make the frames possible. I want to be able to vibrate from one note to another instantly in those. So if we start with, for example, the arpeggio vibrato pattern, I want to be able to go from the first finger to this note, or to the 4, and so on and so forth, and do those fairly rhythmically, so that you get comfortable. And the whole time you do it, it's helpful if you give yourself some kind of a rhythmic pulse. And you go slowly at first. These are tricky because you want to tense up for the spanning of the tenth. The same you would do with the scales. And every combination. And I'm trying to make sure that none of these lifts or drops tighten my shoulder. I'm really trying to stay free here. And I do that with the 8 shapes that I showed you earlier. I then go to a 1-octave scale. And I just very carefully, I like to go into a higher position actually for this, 3rd or 4th position. And practice connecting every note to the next. Then I'll try connecting two notes. Four. Again, trying to stay loose. Then you should do the exercise of slow to fast, fast to slow vibrato relationships between your arm, wrist, and fingertip. Feeling the fastest in the fingertip, to the wider in the wrist, to the slowest in the arm, to the faster in the wrist, to the fastest in the fingertip. The fingertip pressure should remain extremely light. fingertip always first in the beginning of a new vibrato, at least for the impact, the collapsing of the knuckle, the release in the bicep. Then you can speed it up in the wrist and even faster into the fingertip. So don't practice one. And as you go through them, really monitor that your intention and tension don't correlate. That you're not getting tighter when you try to speed up, or that you feel the same freedom and the same angles as you're doing that. So when I would come home in the elevator and get out of the door, I would hear a kind of sound vocabulary like this. And there were all these different vibrato speeds and different amounts of bow pressure. The second phrase would be totally different. And I'd be like, just transfixed by this sound, and that was just to that point of the piece. Then he went ballistic with sound production. I mean, the next one tore my heart out. Second time he started a little more bright. And when he went up to that C, my heart would almost stop. And then a sequence of three that became like, Tasha Seidel on steroids. One that was easier. And that was it. I needed to have a fiddle right away. But even now, I think as I demonstrated that it was nothing compared to it, because there are a couple things that were different. Let's go to being natural. Let's go to not having ego. Let's go to bow correlation. How do we work on all of that to really make it not just an imitation of something, but rather a school of thinking, a way of approaching the violin? For me, I have to get rid of virtues when I get confused and rebuild. So I start with fewer virtues. I might just start with the freedom of the hand, the conditions for vibrato. I might start... On all of those, I had space to the index finger, relaxed shoulder, and release in the fingertip pressures after the impacts. I didn't vibrate, but the conditions for vibrato exist. Now, as a layer, I can think of the first joint of the finger. Okay, I can do it again. So I've just ended the phrase. So that's where we are in the piece, right? So I have one character, very gutsy, sort of. Now easier. So now I want to get rid of some tensions that I'm feeling, just to make it easier. I'll say less, so I can calm down. I've got Yoda sitting on my desk over here reminding me. on. So I always back up variables. The moment I get excited, just take a deep breath, because I don't want to get emotionally involved in something that's designed to create an emotional reaction in you. I want to control it in the context of time. So I might have to put on a metronome to a slow pulse, and just think about the sound. I think there's no dotted rhythm there. Now during that crescendo, I'm really monitoring that I don't change my tension levels. This is what I think is unnecessary. Keeping the rhythm of the left hand that the vibrato is in. Here, collarbone, not shoulder, for the fiddle. Or it'll be muscular, and feel the shape of the fifth. So release the thumb. This note has to release sooner than we think. And the bow speed has to be slow to create that glissando and that effect. It can't be muscular. The sound can be muscular in terms of the way it affects the listener, but the execution, free. Even the first note, this one little G, it should have vibrato. I just want the note before the harmonic also should have vibrato. Just these little details, it makes all the difference in the world. Now we have a moment where the passion is increasing. And I have to be very, very, very careful, honestly. So what is the left-hand rhythm? It's just... those things are more important to me than putting a lot of juice into it at first. So we'll put that second phrase together. If you want to hold firmly anywhere while you're doing this, when I want to release the shoulder, I allow head pressure into the chin rest against the collarbone so that I can feel secure. But this, I will very often put my arm down, put it back up, put my arm down, put it back up, just to make sure that this is free for all of these. So for this, we are... Now, there are three that grow in intensity, and I'm going to really be careful that the bow arm doesn't overdo it too soon. That when you get the right hand and here, so this is how I carefully try to slowly build up. I mean, I don't have to play that anywhere anytime soon, but it just is a childhood memory that sits with me and that put me on this path, and I wanted to share it with you that way, that when I heard somebody playing with a real impulse style vibrato, it made me fall in love with the violin, and it has nothing to do with the exercises that you see on any of these other tutorials, except maybe Rodney's, which captures it. The way that practicing in fifths centers the hand makes all the difference. So those are some of the exercises. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about moments that are tough for vibrato. One is during an expressive slide or a shift. I don't think people practice those enough, and that should happen with a metronome. You can make up exercises, whatever you like, whether you're going from to second position, French shift, Russian shift, now to the third finger, French shift, or Russian, fourth finger, Russian shift, right? Practice Russian and French shifts between your pitches, between all fingers, going up. And then that was just a second position. You can do all the fingers to third, all to fourth. You can start in third and work up and back. Another thing that will help you a lot in avoiding tension is to practice half shifts. I'll demonstrate what I mean about this. In the piece that I just played, in the Gypsy Caprice, in the expressive section, there are a lot of places where we shift without moving the thumb, both forward and back. The main exercise I like to have my students do for this, and it really helps them to stay relaxed during expressive slides, is to place the hand in fifth position, all right? But be able to move it back to third and up to seventh without moving the thumb at all. You can change the angle of the thumb, is fine. It can pivot and all of that. But I want you to measure your shifts to here, to the A, and to the D. This whole range of the violin, the thumb is not necessarily moving, it's changing angle, it's pivoting. And if we have the ability to half shift, we can clear the bout of the instrument much better without tension going up. And that will affect things when you get to you don't have to rotate the shoulder nearly as much because the thumb is learning to pivot. You're compensating in the wrist, and with the rotation, you're getting around the instrument much more comfortably. The elbow is just opening and closing. So we're really just going like this and letting the hand take care of some of it ahead of and behind the hand, and cutting our distances that way. That's very important. The other thing is, again, feeling that the fingers are truly over the notes so that when they fall, they can give back. If I'm not rotated enough and then I vibrate back, the index finger jams into the neck and that stops the vibrato. If you're turned enough, when you go from note to note, when you lift the upper fingers, lift them this way, not back that way, and the lower finger vibrato will work better and stay more centered. you'll get a much better sound. So then I keep shifting my focus between all of the points that I brought up. I'll notice something. I'll notice, oh, release the bicep. How do I? Just going through, I'll do that same phrase, going through all of the things to monitor. Fingertip pressure, ability of the fingers to lengthen, elbow hanging from the shoulder, angles of the finger to the string, the center of gravity in each finger behind the first joint. That one really facilitates the wrist and fingertip vibrato very well. So if I just think about that one now, and use as little arm vibrato as possible, really try to isolate. The arm vibrato, my uncle said to me, is really just like going, I'm going to get you. And you're not even tightening. It's not this, it's not like, it's more like just releasing a little bit, like, watch out. I think of the arm vibrato as the slowest pattern because otherwise the shoulder lurches on shifts. You don't want the shoulder to lurch and jerk and have anything like that. So I would not put energy, any sudden energy, closing or opening into the elbow. It's just a release, like the arm, almost like this feeling, ever so slightly. So you can feel that the bicep is engaged, the bicep releases. The bicep is engaged, release. All of now that leads me to concept. If we want to be relaxed, if we want to be natural, if we want not to have intention correlate with tension, we have to think of vibrato as a release. So every note that you play is, this is tighter, this is more relaxed. That in your mind, just as a concept. And if you have big hands like mine, the thing that I always have to do as well is to think lean, because my fingertips are fat anyway. It's going to sound fat enough. Trying to sound fat just becomes muscular if you're a big guy, if you have big hands. So you want to just work with the minimum effort that you can to have maximum effect. I think that's pretty much everything. So if you are practicing some of the exercises that are available on some of these other sites, I highly recommend them. They're good. But if we don't think about the right stuff when we're doing them, we don't get nearly the same result. That's why some people who practice scales improve tremendously. And other people that practice the same scales don't. Don't fall under the misconception that that's a difference in talent. It can be. Some kids are very gifted. More often than not, it's because they're not listening the right way and they're not thinking about the right stuff. So this is why I wanted to give this tutorial and give it for free and put it out there for everyone, because I guarantee you, if you think about this when you're doing your scales, when you do all of your simple scales, you'll be able to connect the sound. You won't get muscular, and when you're playing a piece like what I just did, don't get emotionally involved. I disagree with people that say you want to hear that it creates the result, but you want to listen to your sound. not your emotions. Listen to your sound, not your emotions. Thank you for joining me this morning. I hope you enjoy this little tutorial and keep practicing and bringing beauty into the world. I hope you'll like my page and subscribe, and I hope you'll comment. I'm happy to answer questions as I see them. And enjoy yourselves. Enjoy the fiddle. Take care.